At 2 a.m., I stood in the dimly lit hallway of the ICU, staring at my phone screen. A live feed from my daughter's room. My fingers trembled. I didn't yet know that what I was about to see would completely change my life. But to understand this terror, I need to tell you how I got here. 2 weeks ago on a Monday, I was still happy. Or at least, I believed I was. I'm Rachel Martinez, a nurse with 12 years of experience. The work was demanding with 3 night shifts a week, but it was fulfilling to save patients' lives. 3 years ago, after losing my first husband, I'd been raising my daughter as a single mother. Then 2 years ago, I met David Chen. David, a psychological counselor, was kind, intelligent, and adored my daughter Sophie. He was well known in the community, a regular guest on the local TV show, Good Parenting Today, and a leader in the campaign to eliminate child abuse. He regularly held seminars at schools on how to be a good parent, with over 50 parents coming to hear him speak. The perfect stepfather and perfect husband. I thought we were the perfect family. But looking back now, something felt off from the beginning. David often used the word perfect. We have to become a perfect family. Let's raise Sophie to be a perfect child. He'd say it jokingly, but his eyes never smiled. When Sophie brought home a test with a 98, he smiled and said, "What about the other 2 points?" My daughter answered, "I'm sorry, Papa." At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was just a joke. 3 months ago, Sophie's behavior changed. She had been bright and smart, but suddenly became listless. Her grades plummeted. She lost her appetite and developed dark circles under her eyes. She lost 10 pounds in 3 months. I consulted David about it. He said calmly, "It's the beginning of puberty. You're worrying too much." As a psychological counselor, I'm watching Sophie. She's fine. On TV, he'd say, a child's mental health is more important than their grades. But at home, his expression hardened every time he looked at our daughter's report card. 2 weeks ago, David made a suggestion. Let's hire a tutor. To bring Sophie's grades back up. And so a young teacher named Mark started coming 3 times a week. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evenings from 7 to 9 p.m. It perfectly coincided with my night shifts. Nothing changed the first week. But in the second week, Sophie started avoiding Mark. When I asked, "Are you getting along with Mark?" my daughter looked away and answered, "Yeah." She was trembling slightly. That night, Sophie screamed from a nightmare. "Stop. I can't be perfect." I rushed into my daughter's room. "What do you mean, stop?" Sophie wiped away her tears and said, "It's nothing." There was fear in her eyes. Wednesday afternoon, our neighbor Mrs. Chen stopped by. Suffering from insomnia, she said with a worried look, "On the nights you work, I hear your daughter crying." My heart froze. On my night shifts. But my husband and the tutor should be there. Mrs. Chen continued, "That's just it. I hear screaming, stop, I can't be perfect." Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday nights, every time. My night shift days. All of them. I also heard a young man's voice. "Mark." I immediately suspected him. Was he coming back after leaving at 9 p.m.? Was he doing something to my daughter? When I consulted a colleague at the hospital, she said, "Why don't you install a hidden camera?" I didn't tell David anything. If I'd consulted him, he'd surely say, "You're overthinking this. Aren't you just tired from work?" He always said that. As if doubting my judgment. I made a decision. As a nurse, I needed evidence. Before my Tuesday night shift, I hid a small camera inside a stuffed animal in my daughter's room. I could monitor it in real time on my phone. If Mark came back, I'd have proof. At 7 p.m., I headed to the hospital. I watched from a distance as Mark arrived. At 9, he went home. David said good night to Sophie and put her to bed. At 10 p.m., the light in my daughter's room went out. I waited in the ICU, gripping my phone. If Mark came back. If he was doing something to my daughter. But by 1 a.m., nothing had happened. My daughter was sleeping peacefully. Had I been overthinking it? But Mrs. Chen had no reason to lie. 2 a.m. Suddenly, my daughter's bedroom door opened. My heart pounded violently. I stared at the screen. I was expecting to see Mark. But the person on the screen was my husband, David. My hands shook. David was entering my daughter's room. I held my breath. He turned on the light. Shook Sophie awake. Wake up. It was a cold voice. Not the voice of the David I knew. Sophie opened her eyes sleepily. Papa. What did you get on today's test? My daughter answered quietly, 52. David's voice became cold as ice. 52. You're a failure. My phone nearly slipped from my hands. What is he saying? Is this a dream? Do you remember what I said at the seminar this afternoon? David continued. I said, don't demand perfection. But that's about other people's children. You're different. You're my daughter. You have to be perfect. Sophie started crying. I'm sorry. I tried. Don't cry. Crying is proof of weakness. I rushed to the ICU bathroom. I felt nauseated. Was this really happening? My husband. My kind husband. The community hero. The leader of child abuse prevention. When I returned to the screen, David was saying, stand up. We're going to review now. Until 5 a.m. Papa, I'm sleepy. Please. Stop. Are you going to say, stop, again? Anger seeped into David's voice. You know what will happen if you tell your mother, don't you? Mama doesn't love you. Not you, when you're not perfect. Sophie nodded while trembling. I know. Good girl. Now study. As I watched the screen, tears wouldn't stop falling. But I made no sound. In the ICU hallway, I cried silently. It wasn't Mark. Not from the beginning. It was my husband. All along. I saved the video on my phone. Kept recording. As evidence. Then I checked the schedule for my next night shift, Thursday. Once more, I'd gather evidence. And then I'd completely destroy him. Wednesday morning, I came home as if nothing had happened. David was making breakfast. Good morning, honey. You must be tired from the night shift. A kind smile. The usual smile. Sophie sat at the table with dark circles under her eyes. When she saw me, she smiled a little. But that smile was empty. Sophie, are you okay? David answered, she's fine. She slept well last night, didn't you, Sophie? My daughter nodded. Yeah. Lies. All lies. But I said nothing. Not yet. That afternoon, I called my friend Linda Park, an attorney. I need to see you right away. My husband is abusing my daughter. I have evidence. At Linda's office, I showed her the footage. Linda's face went pale. Rachel, this is psychological abuse. We need to go to the police immediately. Wait, I said. I need more evidence. He's a community hero. A psychological counselor and leader in child abuse prevention. No one might believe it. But your daughter. I'll record again on Thursday. And I want you to investigate his past. Linda nodded. All right. I'll hire a private investigator. That evening, I opened a letter from the bank. A balance confirmation for Sophie's trust fund. The $500,000 my father had left for my daughter. But when I saw the balance, I froze. $320,000. $180,000 was missing. I called the bank. It was withdrawn 3 months ago. By co-manager David Chen. The blood drained from my face. $180,000. 3 months ago. The same time Sophie's behavior changed. At dinner, I asked David, "Did you withdraw $180,000 from Sophie's trust fund?" David answered calmly, "Yeah, I used it for Sophie's education. The tutor and things. But $180,000. Other things too. You're busy, so I'm managing it." He smiled. "Don't worry. It's all for Sophie." I couldn't say anything. But inside I was screaming. Liar. Thief. Abuser. Thursday night, I went to work the night shift again. At 7 p.m., Mark arrived. He left at 9. David put Sophie to bed. And at 2 a.m., David entered my daughter's room again. Turned on the light. Woke Sophie up. "Tonight is math. If you get it wrong, no meals." Sophie solved problems while crying. "Got them wrong." David said coldly, "Do it again." And before David left the room, he said, "You know about your trust fund, don't you? There was $500,000. But I used it. Because you're not perfect, you're not worth it. When you become perfect, I'll give it back." Sophie answered trembling, "I'll become perfect. I promise." I gripped my phone. I recorded everything. The evidence was complete. Friday afternoon, I got a report from private investigator James Rodriguez. At Linda's office, we spread out the materials. David Chen's ex-wife, Jennifer. They have 2 children. Currently 15 and 13. I gasped. David had children. The reason for divorce was suspected child abuse. But there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. The children. The investigator continued with a dark expression. The eldest son is truant, suffering from social phobia. The younger son has an eating disorder and has been in and out of hospitals. My hands shook. David had done this before. Furthermore, the investigator pulled out another document. He embezzled $180,000 from the ex-wife's children's treatment fund from their trust fund. $180,000. The same amount as Sophie's trust fund. And, Linda showed me another document. "Your life insurance beneficiary has been changed." What? It was originally Sophie. But 3 months ago, it was changed to David. The amount is $750,000. I never made that change. The signature is forged, Linda said. This is a crime. I calculated. Sophie's trust fund $180,000, the ex-wife's children's treatment costs $180,000, my life insurance $750,000, and Sophie's remaining trust fund $320,000. A total of $1,430,000. David was using us for money. I want to meet the ex-wife, I said. Saturday afternoon, I met Jennifer. At a small cafe, she sat with a tired face. "You noticed too," were her first words. "My husband was waking my daughter up in the middle of the night and abusing her. And stealing money." Tears filled Jennifer's eyes. I was too late to notice too. At first, I suspected the tutor. But it wasn't. It was David. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I had no evidence. He's a psychological counselor. A community hero. No one believed me. She continued in a trembling voice, This is education, it's to make the children perfect, he insisted. And then he stole $180,000 for my children's treatment. Your children? My eldest son can't talk to anyone now. My younger son can't eat. Jennifer gripped my hand. Please. This time, stop him. I nodded. I promise. That night, Linda sent me new information. David's father, George Chen, is still alive. And he calls David regularly. I listened to a recording from David's cell phone that Linda had legally obtained. I heard the father's voice. David, you're a perfect son. David answered, thank you, father. How are your stepdaughter's grades? Not perfect yet. But I'm training her. Good. You're practicing what you learned from me. Yes. Every night, just as you did for me. If you're not perfect, you're worthless. Teach her that. I am teaching her. I stopped the recording. I couldn't stop trembling. David was raised being abused by his father. And now he was doing the same thing to Sophie. Generational cycles. Monday, I met with David's therapist. Along with Linda. The therapist said with a serious face. David was abused by his father in childhood. He believes, if you're not perfect, you won't be loved. Does he know he's abusing? No, the therapist shook his head. To him, this is showing affection. He's doing the same thing as his father. He doesn't recognize that he's abusing. I clenched my fists. I didn't care about reasons. He was hurting my daughter. That was everything. This Thursday, I told Linda. There's an event at David's workplace. The Child Abuse Prevention Campaign presentation. Over 50 people will gather. So, have him arrested there. Contact FBI agent Sarah Martinez. I smiled coldly. Right in the middle of his speech about preventing child abuse. Linda looked at me. Perfect revenge. No, I shook my head. This is justice. Thursday morning, David was in high spirits. Can you come to tonight's event? I smiled calmly. I have a night shift. I'm sorry. That's too bad. But it can't be helped. Your work is important too. He said while tying his tie, a lot of people are coming tonight. Even the mayor. This might be the most important event of my life. Yes. It will be the most important night of your life. Just not in the way you think. At 6 p.m., I was in the car with Linda. In the parking lot of David's workplace, the Family Wellness Center. People were gathering at the event venue. Parents, educators, local media. Over 50 people for sure. Where's FBI agent Sarah Martinez? She'll arrive at 7:30, Linda answered. In the middle of David's speech. I checked my phone. The recorded footage, bank records, ex-wife's testimony, everything ready. At 7 p.m., the event began. We snuck into the back of the venue. David stood on stage. In the spotlight, he looked radiant. Like a hero. The host introduced him. Today's guest speaker, David Chen, is one of the most respected psychological counselors in this region. As a leader in the child abuse prevention campaign, he has saved countless families. Applause erupted. David smiled kindly. Everyone, thank you, his voice was warm. We're gathered here tonight to discuss something important. To protect children. The audience listened intently. Abuse happens in invisible ways, David continued. Hitting, kicking, that's not all abuse is. Verbal violence, psychological control, that's also abuse. I clenched my fists. How can you say that? You don't need to be perfect parents, David said. Love is enough. Let's respect children's individuality. Don't demand perfection from children. The audience was taking notes. A mother wiped away tears. Wonderful, someone whispered. We must listen to children's voices. David's voice grew stronger. If a child says, stop, that's a sign they're asking for help. We mustn't ignore it. My heart pounded violently. Stop. The word Sophie screams every night. Abusers often have two faces, David continued. Kind in public, cruel at home. That's why we must observe carefully. Exactly right, David. That's exactly you. 7:30 p.m. The venue doors opened. FBI agent Sarah Martinez came in. Behind her were two agents. The audience turned around. A murmur arose about what was happening. David tried to continue his speech. Therefore, if you see a child suffering around you. David Chen, Sarah called out while walking through the center of the venue. David froze. Yes. You're under arrest for child abuse and embezzlement. The venue fell silent. Over 50 pairs of eyes were fixed on David on stage. The color drained from David's face. What are you talking about? I'm a child abuse prevention activist. You were abusing your stepdaughter at home. Sarah took out handcuffs. Evidence? There can't be any. I stood up. Walked forward from the back of the venue. The audience made way. I held my phone in my hand. There's evidence, David. David looked at me. Fear appeared on his face for the first time. Rachel, you have a night shift. I lied. Just like you. My phone connected to the venue's screen. Linda was operating it. The footage began to play. Sophie's room. Middle of the night. David shaking his daughter awake. Wake up. A cold voice. The audience gasped. What did you get on today's test? 52. 52. You're a failure. A small scream came from the venue. A mother covered her mouth with her hand. The footage continued. David saying to Sophie, if you're not perfect, you're worthless. Don't cry. Crying is proof of weakness. David's colleague stood up. This can't be. David. The mayor said in a trembling voice, I can't believe this. The footage continued further. David saying to Sophie, you know about your trust fund, don't you? There was $500,000. But I used it. Because you're not perfect, you're not worth it. Linda stood up and showed the bank records. $180,000 was illegally withdrawn from Sophie's trust fund. By David Chen. The audience murmured. Furthermore, Linda continued. He also embezzled $180,000 for his ex-wife's children's treatment. Sarah said, and he changed the beneficiary of his wife's life insurance without permission and forged the signature. The amount is $750,000. David collapsed to the floor. No. I was just educating. Education? I said coldly. You were waking my daughter every night until 5 a.m. and abusing her. On my night shift days, every time. I was just trying to be a perfect father. David said in a trembling voice. Just like your father. David looked up. For the first time, understanding appeared in his eyes. I continued, your father, George Chen, did the same thing to you. If you're not perfect, you're worthless. And you're doing the same thing to Sophie. Silence spread through the venue. David muttered quietly, Father. I didn't want to become like you. But you did, I said. You became the same abuser as your father. And you stole money from us. Sarah put handcuffs on David. David Chen, you have the right to remain silent. David said nothing. Just stared at the floor. Tears ran down his cheeks. Someone in the audience said, I attended his seminar 3 times. Someone else said, I trusted his advice. Local TV cameras recorded everything. Tomorrow, this footage would be broadcast nationwide. The child abuse prevention leader was abusing at home. As a hypocrite. As David was led out of the venue, he looked at me once. There was nothing in his eyes. Empty. Over 50 people left in the venue stood dazed. One woman was crying. What are we supposed to believe? I approached her. Believe children's voices. When a child says, stop, believe them. That night, I went home. Sophie was sleeping. But when I entered the room, she woke up. Mama, where's Papa? Papa won't be coming anymore, I hugged my daughter. Never again. Sophie said quietly, Mama, is it okay if I'm not perfect? I stroked my daughter's hair. Tears overflowed. It's okay not to be perfect. You're perfect just as you are. For the first time in 3 months, Sophie showed a real smile. And fell asleep in my arms. She didn't scream from nightmares in the middle of the night. I looked out the window. Dawn was approaching. The beginning of a new day. A day without David, just for us. This wasn't the end. There would be a trial ahead. It would take time to heal Sophie's emotional wounds. But we'd be okay. I believed in my daughter. That was everything. The next morning, David's arrest was national news. The TV announcer said, Child abuse prevention campaign leader David Chen was arrested on suspicion of abusing his stepdaughter at home. Additionally, embezzlement totaling $1,430,000. Footage played. Last night's event venue. Evidence of abuse shown on the big screen. The moment handcuffs were put on David. I turned off the TV. I didn't want to show Sophie yet. Sophie was quietly eating cereal at the breakfast table. For the first time in 3 months, she was eating properly. Mama, my daughter said quietly. Can I go to school? Of course. But you don't have to push yourself. I want to go, Sophie looked at me. A little light had returned to her eyes. I want to see my friends. I took my daughter to school. At the school gate, her homeroom teacher Mrs. Williams was waiting. Ms. Martinez, I saw the news, the teacher said with a serious face. I'm so sorry we didn't notice anything about Sophie. It's not your fault, teacher, I shook my head. David was acting perfectly. If Sophie had asked for help. He blocked that too. He threatened Sophie not to tell anyone. The teacher bit her lip. From now on, what can we do as a school? Please treat Sophie normally. Don't give her special treatment, but watch her carefully. The teacher nodded. Understood. That afternoon, at Linda's office, I met with the prosecutor. A young woman, Prosecutor Emily Thompson. Ms. Martinez, the evidence is perfect, she said while watching the video on my phone. With this much, a guilty verdict is certain. What's the sentence? 2 counts of child abuse, Sophie and the ex-wife's children. Embezzlement, attempted life insurance fraud, document forgery, Emily counted on her fingers. At least 12 years, no parole. Only 12 years. Furthermore, Emily continued. Permanent revocation of his psychological counselor license. All assets paid in restitution to victims. And most of all, his social downfall is. I looked out the window. He was a community hero. Everyone trusted him. That's exactly why, Emily said. The betrayal is so great. Have you seen social media? I shook my head. I didn't want to see it. It's exploding. Past seminar participants are flooding in with angry voices. TV stations have deleted all past footage of his appearances. Publishers have pulled his books out of print. The following week, I met Jennifer again. This time with her children. Eldest son Ethan, 15. Younger son Caleb, 13. When Ethan saw me, he looked away. Caleb hid behind his mother. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said. "Both of them are afraid of meeting people." "That's okay," I said gently. "Sophie is the same." Jennifer said to her sons, "This is the person who stopped your father." Ethan said quietly, "Thank you." Caleb said nothing, but lifted his face a little. "The $180,000 stolen from David," I said. "All of it will be returned. Please use it for treatment." Tears filled Jennifer's eyes. "Really?" The prosecutor promised. "It will be paid in restitution from all of David's assets." "Thank you," Jennifer gripped my hand. "If you hadn't gathered evidence, we wouldn't have gotten anything back." At that moment, Caleb said quietly, "Is Sophie okay?" I smiled. "Little by little, she's getting better." "That's good," Caleb smiled for the first time. A small, but real smile. 1 month later, the trial began. The courtroom overflowed with press. David came in wearing prison clothes. In 1 month he'd lost nearly 20 pounds. He had dark circles under his eyes. The prosecutor presented evidence. Hidden camera footage, bank records, ex-wife's testimony, recordings with David's father. David's lawyer said, the defendant was abused by his father in childhood. "This is a generational cycle, Anne." The judge interrupted. "That's no excuse." The defendant was well aware of abuse issues as a psychological counselor. Nevertheless, he repeated the same thing. Furthermore, there was financial motive. David said nothing. Just looked down. When I took the witness stand, David looked up for the first time. The prosecutor asked, "Ms. Martinez, why did you install a hidden camera?" "My neighbor told me she heard my daughter crying. At first I suspected the tutor. But I needed evidence." "And what did you discover?" "My husband was waking my daughter in the middle of the night and forcing her to study until 5 a.m. saying, 'If you're not perfect, you're worthless.'" I took a deep breath. "And he stole $180,000 from my daughter's trust fund. How did you feel then?" I looked at David. He looked away. I felt betrayed. But more than that, I regretted not being able to protect my daughter. "But ultimately, you did protect her, didn't you?" "Yes," I nodded. "And I'll never let this happen again." The next day, Sophie was scheduled to testify. But I refused. "My daughter is only 8 years old. I don't want to hurt her anymore." The judge showed understanding. "The video is sufficient. Your daughter's testimony is not necessary." Instead, child psychologist Dr. Williams testified. "Sophie shows symptoms of chronic sleep deprivation, weight loss, and post-traumatic stress disorder," the doctor said. "This is clearly the result of long-term psychological abuse." "What's the prognosis for recovery?" "It will take time. If she continues therapy, she'll gradually recover. But the wounds are deep." David's father, George Chen, was also called as a witness. A 68-year-old man stood at the witness stand with a cane. "How did you raise your son?" the prosecutor asked. George answered coldly, "I raised him strictly. Demanded perfection. Violence? When necessary." The courtroom murmured. "Knowing your son was doing the same thing, how do you feel?" George shrugged. "My son was just practicing what I taught him." "Regrets?" "None." I clenched my fists. This man broke David. But that's no excuse. David was an adult. A psychological counselor. He could have chosen his own actions. On sentencing day, the courtroom was silent. The judge said, "Defendant David Chen, while advocating for child abuse prevention, you were abusing at home. This is the most malicious hypocrisy." David stood trembling. "Furthermore, you embezzled the victim's trust fund and attempted to defraud your wife's life insurance. Financial motive is also clear. 12 years in prison, no parole. Permanent revocation of psychological counselor license. I order you to pay restitution to the victims from all your assets." David collapsed to the floor. He was crying. As I left the courtroom, David said to me, "Rachel. I didn't turn around. Goodbye, David." Those were my last words. That night, Sophie and I had dinner together, just the two of us. "What happened to Papa?" Sophie asked. "Papa is going to prison. For a long time." "Is he coming back?" "No," I held my daughter's hand. "He won't appear before us again." Sophie thought for a moment and then said, "Good." That night, Sophie slept in her own room, hugging that stuffed animal. The hidden camera was no longer inside, but Sophie didn't know that. I looked at my daughter's sleeping face. It was peaceful. She didn't moan from nightmares. Outside the window, rain began to fall. Gentle rain. As if washing everything away. I quietly left the room. Tomorrow, a new day would begin again. Days without David, just for us. 1 year passed. For Sophie's 9th birthday party, I invited Jennifer and her sons, neighbor Mrs. Chen, and tutor Mark. Sophie blew out the candles on the cake. "What did you wish for?" I asked, and my daughter answered with a smile, "It's a secret. But it's already come true. I have Mama, I have friends, and I know it's okay not to be perfect." I hugged my daughter. Tears overflowed. Jennifer's sons had returned to school and were recovering little by little. Ethan and Caleb gave Sophie a handmade picture as a present. A rainbow and smiling children. "We're friends, right?" Sophie asked, and they both nodded. Neighbor Mrs. Chen said, "This past year, I haven't heard Sophie crying once." I held her hand. "Thank you for having the courage to tell me back then." That night, Sophie said, "Sometimes I remember Papa. I have scary dreams." My hand stopped. "But you know, in the dream when I say, 'Mama will protect me,' Papa disappears." I hugged my daughter. "I'll always protect you." The following week, I was chosen as the new leader of the local child abuse prevention campaign. The organization David had led. I spoke to over 50 parents at a lecture. Family isn't about perfection. It's about protecting each other. When you sense something is wrong, believe your children. I launched a child abuse detection program at the hospital. Thanks to this program, 3 children were saved from abuse. 2 years later, a letter arrived from David in prison. What I was doing wasn't education but abuse. Please tell Sophie. She doesn't need to be perfect. Every night, I hear Sophie crying. I think that's my punishment. I folded the letter. I won't show it to Sophie. 10 years later, David had a heart attack in his prison cell and died alone. No one was there with him. His body lay for 48 hours and was buried as an unclaimed person in the state's common cemetery. Only his prisoner number was engraved on the headstone. David's father George also spent a lonely old age and muttered, "Was it I who destroyed my son?" But it was too late. Around the same time, Sophie turned 16. "Mama, I want to study psychology. I want to help children who've been abused." I was moved to tears by my daughter's growth. Papa hurt people. But I want to heal them. The generational cycle ended here. I looked back at the past. If I hadn't had the courage to see the truth that night. But I looked. And I protected my daughter. Quiet breathing came from Sophie's room. This was a real family. Not perfect, but filled with love. Protecting each other. That was enough. Outside the window, the sun began to rise. A new day. A day filled with hope. This is our story. A story that began with wounds and continued toward healing. And above all, a story of the unshakable bond between mother and daughter.